The President of the United States is announcing to the world that hostages must be released and peace will follow. In a remarkable announcement, Donald Trump has put Hamas on notice, demanding hostage release and presenting a peace proposal that could transform the Middle East permanently. Simultaneously, CNN is confronting Chuck Schumer, revealing contradictions in his previous statements. And as this develops, Apple has removed a controversial application connected to ICE attacks. These aren't minor headlines, but active shifts in politics and global security occurring in real time. Before examining what transpired today, we need to grasp the broader context. The Middle East has been a powder keg across generations, and the present situation between Israel and Hamas proves no exception. We're discussing hostages, men and women, some held for months, some who tragically perished in captivity. We're discussing bombings that have claimed civilian lives on both sides, infrastructure reduced to rubble, and families torn apart by seemingly endless violence. But what most people don't observe in evening news broadcasts is this. Behind the scenes, there's been a quiet network of countries working relentlessly to locate some kind of resolution. Qatar, Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, these nations have been functioning as intermediaries, hosting secret discussions, carrying messages between parties, refusing direct communication with each other. Consider them the diplomatic equivalent of translators at a family reunion where half the relatives aren't on speaking terms. It's delicate, exhausting work, and for months it appeared nothing was moving the needle. Why am I explaining all this? Because into this tense, complicated, almost hopeless situation stepped President Trump with a message the world couldn't ignore. And I want you to grasp, this wasn't a carefully worded State Department press release. This wasn't diplomatic doublespeak. This was direct, blunt, and it arrived with a countdown clock. Trump took to Truth Social, his social media platform, and posted an ultimatum to Hamas that conveyed something like this: release all the hostages, not some of them, all of them. That includes those who are alive and, heartbreakingly, the remains of those who didn't survive. An agreement must be reached by Sunday evening, 6 o'clock Washington time. Every country involved has signed on. And here's the critical part. If this last chance agreement isn't reached, all hell, like no one has ever seen before, will break out against Hamas. And he concluded by stating there will be peace in the Middle East one way or the other. Now, let's pause for a second and consider what that signifies. One way or the other, that's not a threat whispered in a back room. That's a public ultimatum with a specific deadline and specific consequences. And whether you love Trump, hate Trump, or land somewhere in between, you have to acknowledge this is not how most presidents handle international crises. Most administrations would spend weeks crafting language that offends no one and commits to nothing. Trump just laid it all out plainly. Here's the deal, here's the deadline. And here's what happens if you don't accept it. And here's where it becomes really interesting. Because this wasn't merely rhetoric. Hamas responded not with silence, not with defiance, but with something no one expected: a partial acceptance of the proposal. Let me repeat that. Hamas agreed to return all hostages and accepted parts of Trump's 20-point peace plan. Not every single point, but enough to signal something significant was occurring. Now, you might be thinking, well, actions speak louder than words, right? Let's see if they actually follow through. And you'd be absolutely right to think that. We've witnessed promises broken before. We've seen ceasefires collapse within hours. So healthy skepticism is warranted. But here's why this moment is different. Even a partial acceptance is a crack in the door. In a conflict where both sides have been dug into their positions for years, any movement, any acknowledgement of a peace framework is historic. It's like watching two people who've refused to be in the same room suddenly agreeing to sit at the same table, even if they're not ready to shake hands yet. And then Trump did something that shocked numerous people, especially those who followed his support for Israel over the years. He issued a statement to Israel, not privately, but publicly, instructing them to stop attacking Hamas and stop dropping bombs in Gaza. Why? Because Hamas had accepted parts of the peace proposal, and Trump wanted to create the space for that agreement to actually function. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, based on the statement just issued by Hamas, I believe they are ready for a lasting peace. Israel must immediately stop the bombing of Gaza so that we can get the hostages out safely and quickly. Right now, it's far too dangerous to do that. Think about what that means. Trump is essentially saying to Israel, hold your fire. Let's see if they're serious. If they are, we can get those hostages home. If they're not, we'll know soon enough. It's a test, a high-stakes, very public test. And depending on where you stand politically, You might find the statement shocking, refreshing, confusing, or all of the above. Now, here's where the story takes a turn that tells us as much about our media landscape as it does about the situation itself. When you examine how the story was covered, there's a striking disparity. According to data from Ground News, a platform that tracks media coverage and bias, over half of the outlets reporting on Trump's statement to Israel leaned right politically, while less than a quarter leaned left. In other words, right-leaning sources jumped on this story, while left-leaning outlets largely stayed quiet. Why does that matter? Because it's a perfect example of how narratives are shaped not just by what happens, but by who chooses to highlight it. If you only watch certain news channels or read certain websites, you might not even know that Trump told Israel to stop attacking. You might only hear about the ultimatum to Hamas, or you might hear neither. And that selective coverage doesn't just inform, it shapes perception. And perception drives opinion. And opinion drives votes, policy, and the national conversation. So let me ask you this. When the President of the United States makes a move that could end a war and bring hostages home, shouldn't that be front-page news everywhere, regardless of political lean? Shouldn't we all want to know about it, evaluate it, and discuss it? The fact that one side of the media ecosystem amplifies it while the other side buries it should concern every one of us because it means we're not all working from the same set of facts anymore. But while the media played its games, the White House doubled down. Trump didn't frame this as just a Gaza issue or just a hostage situation. He framed it as something much bigger, the beginning of long-sought peace in the Middle East. Now, if you've been paying attention over the years, you know Trump has a history with Middle East peace deals. Remember the Abraham Accords? Those were agreements that normalized relations between Israel and several Arab nations, deals that many experts said were impossible. They happened. And now Trump is positioning this moment as part of that same larger vision. He's saying, in effect, this isn't about one conflict. This is about reshaping the entire region. This is about proving that even the most entrenched enemies can find a path to coexistence. And whether or not you believe that's realistic, you have to admit it's an ambitious goal. And it's one that requires leverage, timing, and a willingness to take risks that most politicians avoid. So that's the international front. But while one front was about peace, another front exploded over safety and security here at home. And this is where it all gets even more complicated because it involves technology, law enforcement, free speech, and a very real act of violence. Here's what happened. Apple removed an app from its app store called IceBlock. Now, if you haven't heard of it, let me explain what it did. This app allowed users to anonymously report sightings of immigration and customs enforcement agents, ICE agents, within a certain radius. You'd see an ICE vehicle or agent in your neighborhood, you'd open the app, drop a pin on the map, and boom, everyone else using the app would know ICE was in that area. The creators of the app said it was a public service, a way to warn undocumented immigrants so they could avoid areas where they might be detained. They compared it to apps like Waze, where drivers report speed traps or police checkpoints. It's just public information, they said. If you see something in public with your own two eyes, you're just sharing that information with others. But law enforcement saw it very differently. And here's why. The FBI confirmed that the sniper who attacked the ICE detention facility in Dallas last week used this app to find out where ICE agents were located. Let me say that again. A person who opened fire on a federal facility in an attack that left at least one migrant killed used this app to plan that attack. So Apple made the call to remove it, citing information from law enforcement about safety risks. And predictably, that decision sparked a firestorm. On one side, people cheered, saying it was about time big tech took responsibility for apps that put law enforcement officers in danger. On the other side, people cried censorship, government overreach, and accused Apple of caving to political pressure. Now, I want you to think about this for a moment because it's not as simple as either side wants to make it. Is sharing the location of law enforcement officers in real time the same as reporting a speed trap? Or is it fundamentally different? Because it's not about avoiding a ticket, it's about evading federal authorities who are carrying out lawful immigration enforcement. And more importantly, if that information is used not just to evade, but to target and harm those officers, does the app creator bear any responsibility? The app's creator went on CNN and said he was being targeted by the Trump administration, that his app did nothing wrong, and that ICE just wants to operate in secrecy without accountability. He compared ICE to a paramilitary force and argued that transparency is essential in a democracy. And look, I understand that argument. Transparency is important. Accountability is important. But here's the problem with his logic. There's no app publicly available that tells you where SWAT teams are about to raid a location. There's no app that tracks FBI agents in real time. Why? Because giving criminals advance notice of law enforcement operations doesn't promote accountability. It undermines public safety. And when you add in the fact that a violent attacker used the specific app to carry out an assault on a federal facility, the conversation shifts from free speech to public endangerment. And here's the question I'd ask the app creator if I had the chance. Is it true that there are criminal illegal aliens in this country? Yes or no? Is it true that some of those individuals have committed violent crimes and would rather harm an ICE agent than be deported? Yes or no? And if the answer to those questions is yes, which it is, then isn't it possible that your app, however well-intentioned, is being used as a tool by people with very bad intentions? Now, the creator isn't the only one upset. A guy named Joe Walsh, a former congressman turned vocal Trump critic, posted on social media calling this fascist behavior and government overreach. And here's where it gets really interesting. People went back through his old posts and found that when Parler, a conservative social media app, was removed from every major platform a few years ago, Joe Walsh had nothing to say, not a word, no outrage, no defense of free speech. But now, when an app that tracks ICE agents gets pulled, suddenly it's an assault on democracy. That's called hypocrisy, folks. And it's exhausting. Because if you're going to stand on principle, if you're going to say that private companies shouldn't remove apps or platforms for political reasons, then that principle has to apply equally. You can't cheer when your opponents get deplatformed and then cry foul when it happens to your side. That's not principle. That's partisanship. So we've got an international peace deal hanging in the balance, a controversial app removed after being linked to violence, and a media landscape that seems more interested in shaping narratives than reporting facts. But if you think that's enough drama for one day, buckle up because we haven't even gotten to Chuck Schumer yet. And trust me, what happened to him on CNN is the kind of political humiliation that will be replayed in attack ads for years to come. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, one of the most powerful Democrats in Washington, sat down with CNN's Jake Tapper for what was supposed to be a friendly interview. And Tapper, to his credit, did something that's become increasingly rare in political journalism. He actually challenged his guest with his own past statements. Tapper pulled up a clip from earlier this year, back in March, where Schumer was adamant that government shutdowns were bad policy and should never be used as a political tactic. Schumer had said that there are no winners in a government shutdown. As bad as passing a continuing resolution is, allowing Donald Trump to take even more power through a shutdown is far worse. Therefore, I will vote to keep the government open. That was March. It's now October. And guess what Schumer is doing? Threatening to use a government shutdown as leverage to block Republican budget priorities and force concessions on healthcare funding. Tapper played the clip, then looked at Schumer and said essentially, so what changed? Isn't the outcome the same? Trump's still in office. He's still threatening federal firings. He's already frozen billions in funding to blue states like New York. Why is a shutdown suddenly acceptable now when it wasn't 6 months ago? And you could see Schumer squirm. He tried to pivot. He said, well, look, there's a lot of difference between now and then. Back then, we wanted to see what they would do, and we've seen how horrible they are. The horrible healthcare cuts they made in their so-called big, beautiful bill. Trump even now says they want to change the name. They're so embarrassed about it. But here's the thing. That's not an answer. That's deflection. Tapper wasn't asking whether Schumer liked the Republican budget. He was asking why the principle of never use a shutdown as a weapon suddenly didn't apply anymore. And Schumer couldn't give a straight answer because there isn't one. The truth is, his position changed not because the facts changed, but because the political calculation changed. And Tapper didn't let it go. He pressed harder, pointing out that Trump has already frozen billions in funding to New York and other blue states, that federal workers are facing layoffs, and that all the conditions Schumer warned about in March are already happening. So why is a shutdown, which Schumer himself said makes things worse, now on the table? Schumer tried again. He said, we don't want a shutdown, that's for sure, but Jake Tapper, and frankly anyone paying attention, knew that wasn't true. Because just days earlier on MSNBC, Democratic strategists were openly saying they wanted to use the shutdown to make the American people feel pain under Republican leadership. The strategy wasn't subtle. It was explicit: force a shutdown, let services suffer, let voters get angry, and then blame Republicans in the next election cycle. Now, think about what that means. It means Schumer and his colleagues are willing to weaponize a government shutdown, something that affects real people, real paychecks, real services for their own political gain. And the kicker, he's doing the exact thing he condemned just months ago. That's not leadership, that's opportunism. And voters, especially those of us who've been around long enough to recognize political games when we see them, aren't fooled. But wait, it gets worse. Tapper then brought up another issue, healthcare for illegal immigrants. Republicans have been hammering Democrats on this, saying their budget proposal would funnel federal Medicaid dollars to undocumented immigrants. Schumer got visibly irritated. He snapped back. He said it's all a lot of bull. Not a single federal dollar goes to undocumented immigrants. Not for Medicare, not for Medicaid, not for ACA. Why are they making up this lie? Except here's the problem. Tapper had done his homework. He pointed out that the Democratic budget proposal would repeal a provision from the Republican reconciliation bill that reduced federal reimbursement for emergency Medicaid at hospitals. And yes, some of that emergency Medicaid goes to people without insurance, including undocumented immigrants. So while it's true that undocumented immigrants don't qualify for regular Medicaid enrollment, they do receive emergency care that is reimbursed with federal dollars. Schumer tried to argue that's not the same thing, but it's a distinction without much difference. The money is federal, the recipient is undocumented, and voters understand that when you repeal a cost control measure, you're increasing spending. To dismiss it as a Republican lie, when it's based on the actual text of the Democratic proposal, just made Schumer look dishonest. And you could see it in his face. This wasn't going the way he expected. CNN is supposed to be friendly territory for Democrats, right? Jake Tapper isn't some right-wing bomb thrower, but here he was methodically dismantling Schumer's talking points with Schumer's own words and the actual policy details. It was the kind of journalism we should see more of, holding powerful people accountable, regardless of party. Now, here's why this matters beyond just one awkward interview. Chuck Schumer is not some backbench congressman. He's the Senate Majority Leader. He's one of the most powerful people in Washington. And if he can't defend his own positions under mild questioning from a generally sympathetic interviewer, what does that say about the strength of those positions? What does that say about his leadership? Republican Senator Bill Hagerty went on Fox News later that day and absolutely unloaded. He called it a temper tantrum by Chuck Schumer and said the real issue is that Schumer is terrified of losing a seat. Hagerty pointed out that recent polling in New York shows Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would beat Schumer in a Democratic primary. Think about that. The sitting Senate Majority Leader is vulnerable to a challenge from his left flank, and he knows it. So Schumer's in an impossible position. If he works with Trump on anything, his progressive base will call him a sellout, and AOC will primary him. But if he refuses to work with Trump on everything, he looks obstructionist, and moderate voters will punish him. He's painted himself into a corner by spending years calling Trump a fascist, a threat to democracy, and worse, when you use that kind of rhetoric, you can't then turn around and negotiate in good faith. Your own words box you in, Hagerty put it bluntly. This is about demonstrating a will to fight. They don't have a point they're fighting for. They don't seem to have an off-ramp. They have not figured out how to land the plane. This is performative, and I don't think the public is going to like it at all. And he's right, because here's what voters see. Trump making a bold move for Middle East peace, Apple making a tough call to protect law enforcement, and Schumer flailing on national television, unable to defend his own contradictions. Leadership isn't about talking points. It's about conviction, consistency, and the courage to explain your positions even when they're uncomfortable. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, well, politicians flip-flop all the time. Why is this different? And that's a fair question. But here's why this moment stands out. Schumer didn't just change his mind quietly. He loudly, publicly staked out a position 6 months ago, and now he's doing the exact opposite while pretending nothing has changed, and he got called out for it on live television in a way that's going to follow him. It's the political equivalent of getting caught in a lie at Thanksgiving dinner. Everyone at the table heard what you said earlier, and now you're saying the opposite, and we're all just sitting here watching you try to explain it away. Except this isn't Thanksgiving dinner. This is the national stage, and millions of people are watching. And what makes it even more damaging is the context. This isn't happening in a vacuum. This is happening while Trump is out there brokering peace deals, setting deadlines, and making things happen. Whether you agree with his methods or not, the contrast couldn't be sharper. One leader is acting decisively on the world stage. The other is tied in knots by his own contradictions. So where does all this leave us? We've got a hostage situation that might actually be resolved. We've got a controversial app removed after being linked to violence. We've got a media environment that shapes reality as much as it reports it. And we've got a senior Democratic leader looking weaker by the day. But here's what connects all these reports, and this is important. They're all about power, accountability, and leadership under pressure. Trump used leverage, a public ultimatum with a hard deadline, to force movement from Hamas. Apple used its platform power to remove an app after law enforcement connected it to an attack. And Schumer, under the gentlest of media pressure, revealed that his positions aren't based on principle, but on political convenience. So let me ask you some questions, and I really want you to think about these. Do you think Trump is making the correct move? And does Trump deserve credit if Hamas actually follows through and releases those hostages? And what about that app? Should Apple have removed it, or was that censorship? Is tracking law enforcement officers in real time a legitimate form of transparency, or does it cross a line into endangering public safety? Where do you draw that line? And who gets to decide? And Chuck Schumer, has he lost touch with his own base? Is he trapped by his own rhetoric? And more broadly, what does it say about our political system when senior leaders can't have honest conversations about their own positions without falling apart under questioning? These aren't easy questions. They don't have simple answers, but they're the questions we need to be asking if we want to understand what's really happening in our country and where we're headed. If you found this breakdown valuable, if it gave you information or perspective you weren't getting elsewhere, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that like button. It's a small thing, but it tells YouTube that this kind of content matters, that people want in-depth analysis and not just clickable headlines. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and click that subscribe button and turn on notifications. That way you won't miss it when we tackle the next big story. And believe me, there's always a next big development waiting